So we're recording this video in August, and August is the last month of winter in New Zealand. And fittingly enough, the theme of the week today is the weather in September, which is the first month of spring. September is a fantastic time to travel to New Zealand. It is the beginning of the tourist season, but New Zealand is not crowded just yet, so you can still have some moments of this feeling of getting the whole country to yourself. It is, though, because it's spring, the most perfect time of the year to experience this famous 4 seasons in one day, isn't it?
Yeah.
It definitely is going to be a time of the year when you are traveling to New Zealand with the right gear packed. You've got to pack correctly. So, in this video today, we're going to go over some travel tips for traveling in New Zealand in September, some of the most common weather patterns, such as the common temperatures, rainfalls, and we're also going to give you the must-pack for traveling in New Zealand in September. And if we don't forget, because I just almost forgot, we're also going to tell you the best places to visit in New Zealand in September. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so let's begin this video about the weather in September with some tips for visiting New Zealand in September. So if you're planning a trip to New Zealand in September, Laura's got you covered.
Yes, so our first tip is, even though it is the first month of spring in New Zealand, you should still definitely bring some sunscreen with you to New Zealand, and you should apply it when, I was going to say when the sun's out, but even on cloudy days, if you are spending the whole day outside, then don't underestimate how intense the sun can be in New Zealand, even in September, and especially if you're going in spring skiing, if you're going to any of the ski fields during September, that is when you will have the most intense UV rays at those higher altitudes, so make sure you bring sunscreen. Next up, so September is during the shoulder season in New Zealand, so that's kind of when in between, the super low season and the high tourist season, so usually you don't have to plan too many things in advance. If you want to spontaneously book accommodations or tours here and there, that's usually pretty easy to do in September. The only exceptions to that, I would say, would be in those smaller but super touristy hotspots. For instance, if you want to stay in Milford Sound at the Milford Lodge, it's the only accommodation there, so you need to book in advance all year round. Same for Lake Tekapo. It's a very small town with limited accommodation, so in that tourist hotspot, you'll also want to make sure that you book in advance. Next up, be aware that September is the start of the lambing season in New Zealand, and a lot of the hiking trails do cross over farmland, which means that during the lambing season, some of these hiking trails can close. For instance, a popular one is Roy's Peak in Wanaka. So make sure before you're going on any of your hikes, just double check on the Department of Conservation website. They usually have a sort of red alert at the top of the walking trail description saying if it is closed for the lambing season or not. And this continues into October. Speaking of lambing season, if you're on a working holiday visa during September when you're in New Zealand, then this is a good time to find woofing opportunities where you can find accommodation and food in exchange for helping out with the lambing season. So yeah, look up for those opportunities, even with with Woof, but also we do have job listings on our website at nzpocketguide.com, so make sure to check that out. And then finally, as you're hiking through the amazing trails of New Zealand, keep a lookout for the bird life. It's very alive, and there's a lot of bird activity during this time in spring, so take the walking trails slowly. Make sure that you're always looking behind you as well, just to see if there's any awesome wildlife encounters that you don't want to miss.
All right, next up, we'll talk about the average temperatures in New Zealand. Let's begin with the temperature in September. Let's send Laura to the map. So, because New Zealand experiences slightly different climate across the whole country, you really feel the difference between the North and the South Island when traveling in New Zealand in September. But to give you a bit of an idea of what you can expect, here are the average temperature during the day that you can experience in some of the regions in New Zealand. And we're going to begin with northern New Zealand, with beautiful Northland, Auckland and Tauranga. And the average temperature you can experience there is going to be 13 degrees Celsius, which is 56 degrees Fahrenheit in Freedom Unit. That's what the F stands for. In the central North Island, Hamilton, Taupo and Rotorua, you can expect about 10 degrees Celsius, which is about 50 degrees Fahrenheit. It's going to be a little warmer when you visit the geothermal park, and put your hands closer to those vents. Don't do it, it's crazy. It can scald you. Don't do that. It was a joke. You always need those qualifiers, don't you? Alright, in the southwest North Island, we have New Plymouth, Palmerston North and Wellington, where you can expect an average of 11 degrees Celsius, which is 52 degrees Fahrenheit. And finally, for the North Island, we have the eastern North Island with Gisborne, Napier and Wairarapa, and you can experience 12 degrees Celsius, which is 54 degrees Fahrenheit. Alright, let's hop on the ferry and head to the South Island of New Zealand, and we're going to arrive in the beautiful town of Picton, in northern South Island. Don't pick on that town. Okay, so we have northern South Island with Picton, Blenheim and Nelson. The average will be 11 degrees Celsius, which is 52 degrees Fahrenheit. On the western South Island, the beautiful west coast, we have Westport, Hokitika and Milford Sound. It's the wild west coast with 10 degrees Celsius on average, which is 50 degrees Fahrenheit. In the eastern South Island, we have Kaikoura, Christchurch and Timaru. You can expect an average of 10 degrees Celsius, which is 50 degrees Fahrenheit, although this area tends to be really windy, so you may actually feel that it is colder than 10 degrees Celsius. In inland South Island, we have Lake Tekapo, Queenstown and Alexandra, with our coldest temperatures in September at 8 degrees Celsius, which is 46 degrees Fahrenheit. And finally, we're going to wrap up the temperatures in New Zealand for the month of September with the southern New Zealand. We have Dunedin and Invercargill with an average of 9 degrees Celsius, which is 48 degrees Fahrenheit. Next up, we'll talk about rainfalls.
Without the S.
Rainfall. Yeah, without the S. Enough sass, young lady. Okay, so next up on our list of things you need to know when traveling in New Zealand in September, let's talk a little bit about the other weather pattern that you're going to encounter when traveling in New Zealand. And as hinted in the introduction, you're going to experience a 4 seasons in a day. And genuinely, September, as we're switching from winter to spring, is going to be a prime example of that. So expect the sun to get a little stronger, and therefore you need sunscreen, as Laura was hinting, and accept a mixed bag of weather, from like absolutely sunny, beautiful summery days to some very, very, very rainy day. So without further ado, let's talk about rainfall, region by region, what you can expect on average. Okay, so in northern New Zealand, Northland, Auckland and Tauranga, you can expect about 130 millimeters of rain, which is 5 inches. In central North Island, it's a bit drier in Hamilton, Taupo and Rotorua, where you can expect only about 90 millimeters of rain, which is 3.5 inches. In the southwest North Island, in New Plymouth, Palmerston North or Wellington, the capital city, you can expect about 100 millimeters of rain, which is about 4 inches. In eastern North Island, we have Gisborne, Napier and Wairarapa, where you can expect 60 millimeters of rain, which is 2 inches. Alright, we're traveling south and heading to the northern South Island with Blenheim and Nelson, where you can expect 70 millimeters of rain in the Albert Tasman National Park, which is about 3 inches. In the west coast, in western South Island, this is where the rain just, take yeah. What she's doing right here. Add umbrella right here. Yeah, so we have Westport, Hokitika and Milford Sound, so 250 millimeters to 530 millimeters of rain. So we're talking 10 to 21 inches of rain. This also, by the way, includes Milford Sound. Okay, in eastern South Island, we have Kaikoura, Christchurch and Timaru. You can expect the lowest amount of rain, which is 50 millimeters at 2 inches. Inland South Island, Lake Tekapo, Queenstown, Alexandra, 30 to 50 millimeters of rain, which is 1 to 2 inches. And finally, southern New Zealand, Dunedin and Invercargill, 55 millimeters of rain, which is 2 inches. All right, so that wraps up the weather patterns, especially rainfall. Next up, we will talk about the best place to visit in September. Alright, so back to our theme right now. We are going to be talking about the best places to visit in September. So Laura, what are the best places to visit in September in New Zealand?
Okay, first up on our list is the Tongariro National Park. Now, although the Tongariro Crossing is still closed for sort of independent hikers throughout September, it's actually a really cool time to go there and see the snow on the mountains of Mount Tongariro, Ngauruhoe and Ruapehu, and even do some spring skiing on Mount Ruapehu, which is a really awesome experience. Alternatively, there's lots of short walks that you can do in the area to beautiful waterfalls, to see the views of the mountains and get and experience some of that volcanic landscape. So Tongariro National Park in September is pretty awesome.
How about New Zealand's capital city, Wellington? So Wellington is a fantastic place to visit in New Zealand in September because it is usually when the World of Wearable Art big event is happening, and that's really cool where, well, you get the craziest outfits like ever, yeah, and the whole city is kind of like embracing the whole thing. It's a lot of fun. Plus, New Zealand City always have a lot of awesome things happening there, and because of the weather being so changeable, it is kind of a cool thing to be able to stay indoor and hide in Te Papa Museum, which is New Zealand's best museum, no question. Next up,
we have Hamilton. So the reason to go to Hamilton during September is because when it's spring, that is the best time to go to the Hamilton Gardens to see the beautiful flowers in bloom. The Hamilton Gardens is a free attraction you can go to. It is absolutely huge. They have various different themed gardens. It is definitely a highlight and something that people should do when they are traveling, say between Auckland and Taupo, and they want to do a bit of a rest stop in Hamilton. It's a really awesome attraction to check out, and often they have the Tulip Festival there, so maybe your trip will coincide with that.
Although I'm not a big fan of Queenstown, you guys know it, I'm usually one of the detractors. I think Queenstown is fantastic to visit in September for the only reason that white water rafting is epic there in September because it is the beginning of spring. The snow melts, the rapids are more raging, the white waters over there are absolutely fantastic. So September, if you're into whitewater rafting, head to Queenstown and do every tour available. That's awesome. Laura.
Finally on our list we have Kaikoura, which, to be fair, there's never a bad time to visit Kaikoura. So whether it's September, whether it is a different month, Kaikoura is just fun to go visit because you can actually do whale watching there all year round. There's also dolphin swimming that you can do. Yes, even in the cold waters of September, you can go dolphin swimming, but they do suit you up with some nice thick wetsuits, so it's completely fine. And the adrenaline of going in the water with dolphins is usually...
It's not that cold.
It usually warms you up. So, yeah, and also there's lots of seal colonies that you can see from land. You don't necessarily have to get in the water. So, yeah, lots of amazing wildlife viewings to be had in Kaikoura in September and the rest of the year.
Boom! That's our favorite places to visit in New Zealand in September. Next up, we'll talk about packing. Okay, so while you guys continue with all the comments and craziness and everything, it's awesome. I love it. What about Laura guides you through the packing lists in September? All right, let me just get that set up. Okay, it's time for the packing list for September, and Laura is got you covered.
Yes. Speaking of got you covered, you need to make sure you're got covered with thermal layers. How about that as a segue? Yeah, so in September, very changeable weather. You can have some really cold days if the sun's not out, but when the sun gets out, you will probably be happy to take off some layers. So yeah, we definitely advise that you pack some thermal layers, similar to what I have on right here, actually. So like, a nice thin underlayer that you can, have underneath just for some extra warmth. But yeah, like I say, the weather is changeable, so you'll also want to pack some high factor sunscreen because, yes, in September you can still get sunburn. It is the beginning of spring when even on full days, if you are out all day, then the sun can still burn you through the clouds. So just make sure that you have some available. Waterproof hiking shoes is definitely a must, especially because it can rain at any time and having wet feet for the whole trip is not fun. So having some waterproof hiking shoes is definitely a must, and because obviously there's a lot of amazing sights to be seen along the walking trails of New Zealand. And when we say hiking boots, that can be walking shoes as well. You don't necessarily have to go on multi-day epic hiking trips in order to experience New Zealand. You can definitely just do short walks that are manageable for most people, and that's a really good way to see the amazing scenery. You'll also want to bring some swimwear with you to New Zealand. Now, although it is too chilly to go swimming in the lakes or at any of the beaches, I mean, maybe not for some people, but for most, there's still hot pools that you can have a nice soak in, so you'll want to have swimwear for that. There's also lots of water activities like, say, blackwater rafting, underground caving in Waitomo. There'll be whitewater rafting as well, so if you're doing any of those water activities, you'll need swimwear to wear underneath the wetsuits that they'll provide for you. Finally, actually this is not finally, but sunglasses, because when the sun comes out, it is pretty bright during September. And now finally, a rain jacket, because yes, it does rain quite often, quite sporadically in September. So to cover up with a rain jacket is always a good idea.
It will rain in September. All right, so that wraps up our coverage of New Zealand in September. Everything you need to know about the weather, what you need to pack. There is much more information on nzpocketguide.com, and there is a link in the description of this video with the correct article, so you can go check even more information and everything in written form, so you don't have to try to remember all of the stuff we said. You can just print the checklist. And yeah, like and subscribe, and let's go back to the live chat.